the first I'd heard of Swami was from a friend of mine in those days. I get a postcard from India. He started with, "Dear Jack, this is your lucky day, Hawley. I'm sitting on the porch of Sai Baba, who is God, and you should get a book about him that was just written and it just came out. And the book was by Dr. Sam Sandweiss. So I bought the book, brought it home. And as I walked in the door, and my wife looked at it, she said, "Oh my God." I said, "What?" She said, "Well, that's the man that I had a dream about 2 weeks ago."
It's the story of a lifetime. Jack and Louise, the Hawleys, two people from Los Angeles who are about to have their lives tumble inside and out the day they discovered Sai Baba.
Swami knew that I was across the street. He knew that I was looking for a main thread in the Bhagavad Gita that I could work around. And
the years just flew by, and Sai Baba personally directed Jack in the writing of his books, among them this one.
Oh yeah, then he called me in for an interview with Louise and I, and he said, "It's not your inner voice, it's me this time." He said, "You have everything in you that you need to write this book." He said, "And if you don't, then I will take care of it."
And Baba helped him also in the writing of another important book.
Swami brought us in with them, and he was talking to them, and then he said, "Oh, this man is writing a book, management book." He said, "What's the name of the book?" I said, "Dharmic Management, Swami." "Oh, yes, Dharmic Management." They were all very interested and so forth. Swami told me when I was writing that book, he said, I am within you, and whatever you hear or whatever you write will be me saying it.
Jack and Louise have lived their lives full of grace. How do I know? Because I interviewed Jack back in 2002 when he said that by Baba's blessings, all fear had departed him.
In the early days coming here to Swami, that's the way I used to describe it. People would say, "Well, what is so important about that place?" And at one point I just breathed a sigh and said, "Well, there's no fear left in me."
Mm-hmm.
And that's very surprising for them.
You afraid of dying?
No, not a bit.
Afraid of losing a loved one?
Not a bit.
Afraid of losing all that you have?
It never comes into my mind.
Afraid of nuclear war?
Really, not an iota. Not a bit.
See, that's quite remarkable. People would think that you found something, but it's probably a chemical that would alter your consciousness.
Our first Souljourns video of Jack Hawley will be presented in its entirety immediately following this more current talk by Jack. Welcome to Souljourns. This interview was recorded on September 1st, 2020, and given to Souljourns to be shown here by the Sri Sathya Sai Baba Region 8 of Los Angeles.
The first I'd heard of Swami was from a friend of mine in those days, and he worked for me, a guy named Bob Daniele. And I had lost touch with him. We were in the same aerospace company here in Los Angeles. I lost touch with him over the years, but then suddenly I get a postcard from India, and it was written, I think, with a pencil, just a penny postcard, we used to call them. And he said, he started with, "Dear Jack, this is your lucky day, Hawley." He said, "I'm sitting on the veranda." No, he said, use the word porch. "I'm sitting on the porch of Sai Baba, who is God. And I'm spending as much time with him as I can. And you should get a book about him that was just written and it just came out. And the book was by Dr. Sam Sandweiss, and you can buy it in the Hollywood Center." Well, we live down on the beach, so I immediately jumped into my car and drove up to the Hollywood Center, very nice, to the address that he gave. A very nice lady answered the door. She said, "Oh, yes, I've got the book." So I bought the book from her, brought it home. And as I walked in the door, this was maybe 45 minutes later or an hour later, as I walked in the door, my wife I held the book up, and my wife looked at it. She said, "Oh my God." I said, "What?" She said, "Well, that's the man that I had a dream about 2 weeks ago." And she said, it was such a powerful dream. I didn't know who it was or what he was or what. So I didn't bother telling you. She didn't know quite what was going on. So, so that was our beginning. And then when sometime later we started going to meetings, but in Orange County. We were when we would always time our trips. So if we were on our way to San Diego, for example, we'd stop by, make sure that we could stop by and spend a couple hours singing bhajans or whatever at the Orange County, one of the centers in Orange County. Or they had a monthly thing that we'd go and listen to other people talk about him, and it was really very nice for us. So that was the beginning. We did that maybe for 3 or 4 years. See, we had children still in school and so forth. So we didn't feel ready to go to India yet. And then maybe 2 years later, in 1978, I talked with her, and she was really very helpful on it about going to India. So we couldn't, because she was still home with the kids and doing that thing, but I could. So by that time too, my consulting business was going well enough. So there's a skeptic in me. And being from Los Angeles, by the way, every fifth person you see on the street has all the answers, and they're a guru of some kind. So there was some skepticism still in me. So so I thought that if I were to call Japan and call Hong Kong and some of my various clients, I could pay for the trip, and yet if the trip was totally a washout because a phony, then I wouldn't feel that bad about it, is what it was. So I did that. So I lined up a trip that went like this: from LA to Hawaii, and then into Japan, and then to Hong Kong, then into Thailand, and then into Nepal, and then into India, and then from there around the rest of the world into Iran. In those days, we could go into Iran, and then Italy. Oh no, Iran, Israel, then Italy, and then up to England. And one of the ways I could sell that trip was to have her promise to her to meet me in England, and we could spend our own time. So that was the first trip to Swami, and that was by Skeptical Jack. So I did that trip, and when I finally got it, by the way, it was maybe 3 weeks later, because my main aim was to go to Swami, was to go to India and check this stuff out. So I arrived in India, and by that time I'd been on the road for 3 weeks, I think, 3 or 4 weeks. So by that time I had the traveler's illness. I was feeling very uncomfortable. Had a room in Bangalore, and luckily Swami was in Whitefield. I didn't know Whitefield from whatever. So I left that morning feeling very bad in the taxi, but this was the reason for going. So why, I didn't want to spend another 3 days of uncomfortable illness, traveler's illness, waiting to see him. I wanted to see him as soon as I could. So that very next day I got in a taxi, and I felt so bad that 2 or 3 times on the way out to the ashram from Bangalore, my hotel, I actually reached up ready to tap the taxi driver on the shoulder and say, turn around, take me back. I've got to spend 3 days in bed, but I didn't. So when I got there, I walked over to this place. I stepped through a little door that's in a big gate. And as soon as I stepped through that, I felt good. I felt, oh, this is good. My illness is not going to knock me down. So I went in, I sat down at a distance to watch all the things going on. He came out for darshan, which I didn't know what it was, but he came out for that. And I watched the monkeys on the walls walking around and so forth, watched the people especially. And my consulting is really sort of people watching anyway. So I was really having a nice time. And come 5 o'clock or so that day, the afternoon darshan was done. So I left. I went out through that same little door. And when I got in a taxi to go back to the hotel, I felt terrible. Oh my gosh, this illness has come back so quickly. So I got back to the hotel, had really a rough night, not feeling good at all, not knowing whether I'd make it the next day. The next day, I went out in the morning. I didn't want to miss it. So I got in the taxi, hoping that I could get there. I got there okay, still feeling bad. But then I stepped through that little door in the gate and I felt better again. And it started coming to me, oh, wait a minute, maybe there's something special here. Then I spent the next two weeks, roughly 2 weeks there. And I got more, oh, by the way, at that time, that afternoon, after the second good day, my illness was gone. So Swami somehow had taken care of it. Now, I wasn't sure, but I watched it and I loved it. And I knew that something very special was happening. So my whole trip around the world that the skeptical Jack was concerned about turned out to be a wonderful trip. I ended up going into with some work into Iran in those days, and then on through all those other countries and meeting my wife. We had a wonderful time in a nice little place down on the English Channel.
That's amazing. And did you have an interview on that first trip?
Oh no.
So after that trip, you then sort of entered into a period of time which you call the years of living with and for Swami, and there were 26 years of going to see him consecutively and living long periods of time with him.
That first trip, let me tell you the ending of the trip first, because it was sort of a fun ending and it sort of anchors some things. We were there. We did have a little interview with Swami, but it was quick and we were part of a group. But as we left out, he said, "You're not going to stay for birthday." And we wondered about that. We felt sort of bad about that, but we didn't know whether that was a direction to stay or not. We had plans to do a little sightseeing in India. Neither of us had ever been really to India to see, other than my earlier trip. So we went up to Gulmarg on our way home. And in Gulmarg, there's no snow, by the way, at that time, but Gulmarg was very pleasant and so forth. And my wife is a horsewoman. She loves to ride horses. So we rented a couple of horses. I can get by on a horse, but I'm not really a horse pro at all. So, and that's right, I'm sorry, before we left, I was hoping against hope for another good, strong interview with Swami. And I would argue with him. I'd say, "Oh, Swami, I would imagine what he thinks of me." And I'd say, "Oh, no, you're making a mistake on that." And it got to a point where I was so frustrated with Swami not paying attention to me that I hoped he would do, and that I had heard about so many times in Orange County, different people. So I was so angry at him. I called him Mr. Raju rather than Swami or Bhagavan or whatever. "Mr. Raju, you're making a mistake about that," I would say in my mind, my crazy mind. So there we are up on those horses in Gulmarg. And my horse was a skinny little horse, and Louise laughed at it. But every once in a while, he would stop and he would put his legs, because he could feel the weight and how my weight was on his shoulders. And he knew exactly what to do with me. So he'd put his legs out and he'd sprawl his front legs out further and further and further till there was nothing more for me to hold on to. So I'd fall off the front of the horse. I didn't get hurt. I just had to climb back on it, embarrassed, and go on further. And he did that 3 times. So by the time we got back to the stable, I was frustrated with that horse, and I said to the stable fellow, I said, "What's that horse's name?" He said, "Oh," he said, "that's Mr. Raju." So I know. So let's thank you, Swami. Okay, I understand. We should have stayed and so forth. So anyway, we went on our way. But during those years, though, things changed tremendously. One of the first interviews we had was, one of the first interviews on that trip before the Mr. Raju thing toward the end. But the first thing was we went in for an interview. Sorry, this was after Raju's second trip. went on in for an interview, and Swami looked at me. Everybody was sitting down. There's maybe 8 or 10 people in the little interview room sitting around his feet. And he looked at, and I was sitting next to his feet. He slapped me across the face pretty hard, whap. And everybody looked, and they were scared. And Louise was jolted, and everybody was wondering what was happening. And then Swami said, "I love you." And I would, by the way, I wasn't shocked at all. I was giggling when Swami slapped me. I thought, "Oh, that was so nice." So Swami whacked me and said, "I love you," and that has stuck with me, as you can tell. And every time I think of that, we have to smile and giggle a little bit. Then there's another, I think, thing that's worth telling about is our traveling years. By the way, I was also teaching at the school at that time, and at the university, really, with the MBA boys, and conducting various meetings there. So it was sort of nice for us. And I remember Dr. Reddy's father, Narendra Reddy's father, was there at the time, and he asked me, he said, "Why don't you lecture on, to the foreigners?" And I said, "No." I said, I'm still a student here. I'd rather be a student and learn rather than tell." And I said, "When I get there, I'll be sure to let you know." Our neighbor then was Veronica. And we were on our way, following Swami, on our way up to Kodai Canal. And we were in a taxi. And we were running into some very tough traffic. So we had very hard traffic and going along pretty fast. And she was sitting, of course, in the passenger side, which is on the left in their cars. And the mirror was knocked off that side of the taxi. And both Louise and I were shocked. Veronica turned around. She's, by the way, from Ojai. You'll know her. You would have known her. But Veronica immediately said this. She said, "Never look back. That's teaching me not to worry about anything in my past. That just throw it away." So it was really nice to hear her. And then the next time we were on our way somewhere, we were going to go somewhere. She says, "Where are you going?" I said, "We don't know." And she says, "Oh," and in her Hungarian American accent, she says, "Oh, Swami Puts." I said, "Yes, that's exactly right." And that's true. That became a guideline, a strong universal law that we followed since then. Swami Puts. So wherever we found ourselves ending up would be Swami Puts. And what happened is my own business turned. I just changed it. Thank God I was the president of the company, so I could do pretty much what I wanted. But I kept enough consulting business around the world, but I also was really there mostly for Swami. So we would travel and do workshops or do seminars for Sathya Sai Baba in various places around the world. And we'd mix that with some work. By that time, by the way, this was 4 years later, the children had all left. So they were all out of the nest. So Louise was a lot freer to go along with me to the various places. And that kept on for the next 20 years. We were doing that, going places. We would, for example, go to Japan. I would do a little work, but then we'd also, while there, do some work with the Japanese organizations, the Sai organization. And that's the way our life went for those 20 years. It was wonderful. We never knew where we were going to go. And we did a lot of traveling. And we didn't worry about it because we really did know by this time Swami Puts. example would be one time we ended up, and we just come out of the mountainous western part of South America in through, and then we ended up in Rio de Janeiro. It was 5 o'clock in the morning. The plane landed there at the airport, and the airport there wasn't open. It was just partly open, and there was hardly anybody there. It was mostly dark, and we were both hungry and tired, and wanting to find a place to eat. There's no place open in that whole airport. So as we walked by this one little feeding area, it was a very pleasant restaurant, but the door was open, but the red rope was across the door, so nobody could get in it. So, and I looked inside, and the night crew, when they left last night, they hadn't cleaned up all the tables. So I looked at Louise, I unhooked the red rope. I said, "Please enter, madam." So we went in and we sat down at one of the tables where there was bread left over. So we sat down, we ate bread in that very fancy restaurant at the Rio de Janeiro airport. And that's the kind of thing that happened a lot to us. Another time this is all for Swami, by the way. These trips are all Swami. We ended up, we had a long, I don't know why, trip. It took us 52 hours to get to the interim places and then into Australia. And when we arrived there, it was a little bit late. So there were like 300 people waiting in the audience. We were at the whole very, very nice little school that the Sai people were using, but that was Rupert Murdoch's school when he was a boy. So we were there at Rupert Murdoch's school, and we were dog tired. So we didn't have any time to find out what they wanted or who. All we did was just start talking because everybody's sitting there and they had been waiting for 20 minutes or half an hour or so. So we did our talk and so forth. But then we had to wait around because other things were happening. So we went out in the hall and we walked down the hall, and the library door was recessed. So that gave a sort of a dark spot there. So we both went to sleep there on the floor after 52 hours, this was, by the way, sleep on the floor. And then they came by and they picked us up and said, "Oh, you know what we did? Is we canvassed the neighborhood here, and a nice lady down the street has a bedroom for you." So we went into that bedroom and had a nice nap that afternoon. But that's the kind of Swami driven adventure we lived for 20 years. And it was a wonderful time for us, wonderful time. And my whole business took a turn. The turn was toward spirituality. And then I started to write the first book. And the first book was Dharmic Management book. And Swami loved me doing it. And he said, "What's the name of the book?" I said, "Dharmic Management, Swami." "Oh, yes. So then a German group came in, for example, and Swami brought us in with them, and he was talking to them, and then he said, "Oh, this man is writing a book, management book." He said, "What's the name of the book?" I said, "Dharmic Management, Swami." "Oh, yes, Dharmic Management." They were all very interested and so forth. Swami told me when I was writing that book, he said, I am within you, and whatever you hear or whatever you write will be me saying it. So that was fabulous. Nice. By the way, we didn't have a room at that time. We had to move around various places, and I'd plug in here and plug in there. And by the way, in those days, there was no such thing as a laptop computer. So I had to go back to the States and get a big lugging around laptop. So on my way back to the States, I told Louise, I'm going to be back. It'll take me probably a couple of weeks. You know me, I'm very careful about what I buy, and I'll have to research it and so forth. And so I won't be back for 2-3 weeks. So she said, "Okay." She was there happily with Swami and Prashanti Nilayam. So I got back to the States, and the first night I got there, I got a call from my friend, Tony. He said, "Oh, Jackie, I've been researching laptop computers nowadays." And he said, "This is the best one. This is the best buy for you." So I went out the next day, I bought it. By the way, for a laptop in those days was like $2,000, I think. So I went out and bought that the next day, jumped on the airplane, and I was back to India within 5 or 6 days. And that's the kind of things that happen all the way through. Swami putting words in my mouth, Swami doing this, Swami doing that. That first book came out in, I think, 1991 or 90, something like that. And it was, it immediately became a bestseller. Now that's sort of odd, because it was a book about spirituality and management. And it really was reawakening the spirit and work, the power of Dharmic management. So, and you'd see people, professors at various meetings, they'd look at that, it would be so interesting at that. So they'd buy it, but they wouldn't let other people know they're buying it. They'd put it in their bag and then they bring it up and pay for it. So it was the first time ever, to my knowledge anyway, that a management book had a spirit in the title. And by the way, it was really fun for me to do that. And it was nice for me to do that. And it integrated into my consulting work all of the wonderful basic human values that Swami talks about so much. So then the second book came by. The second book was the Bhagavad Gita walkthrough. You probably are familiar with that one. And I was worried. After a while, Swami, I started getting thoughts or words in my mind, or his voice saying, "Do the Gita." And I couldn't. I said, "No, Swami, I'm not a Gita-bred fellow. I couldn't do the Gita. I'm not Indian. I'm Western. I don't really know the story, blah, 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 blah." I had a lot of little arguments. And I kept coming, "Do the Gita, do the Gita." I said, "Swami," well, finally, of course, I lost the argument, and he had better arguments, and he said, "Just do the Gita." So I started working on that, and I noticed that people would come down the street, people that I didn't even know, and they'd hand me a book. Say, "Oh, this is very nice, interesting Gita that you should see about so and so." And it ended up where, well, between researching and then buying them and so forth, I had to read roughly 40 different versions of the Gita, long versions, a lot of them. And you know how the Indian versions are. And the way the Gita is written there by many of the people who translated it into English from the Sanskrit or from Hindi, whatever. They'd say a line that Krishna would say, and then they would have a explanation of that over the next 5 pages. Then there would be another couple of lines, and they'd explain that and so forth. Well, I realized that Swami was getting me, and by the way, and I ended up reading about 40,000 pages. And I got to a point where I really understood the story. A little bit before that, this is the kind of help that Swami gave. A little bit before that, he was again in Whitefield, and I was across the street, and I was doing my research for that book. I was looking in a Gita in a bookshop, upstairs bookshop across the street from the main gate at Whitefield. And I found a book by a very well-known professor in India, and I was looking, by the way, for a through line. What would be the main gist of the Gita that would help me tie it up? And his through line, or his main idea, was that the Gita is a balance between action and serenity or something. So I thought, that makes sense. Oh, and I really appreciated him. I liked him. I liked some of his writings. So I then I heard this right after, as I was reading this book, standing there reading it, I heard the music starting over where Swami was. So I put book down, went over across there, and I sat down with the students. And Swami came out, walked right over to the students, and there I was, like sort of in the front row of it. And he looked at the students, and he said, some people, even good scholars, think that the Gita is a balance between activity and quietness. That's not true. He said, even good scholars think that it's not true. Then he went on to talk with the students about whatever he was there to talk to them about. But then he put that first line in there for me. Swami knew that I was across the street. He knew that I was looking for a main thread in the Bhagavad Gita that I could work around. And and then he called me right back, and he told me, don't use that one. So that was it. So Swami again. Oh yeah. Then he called me in for an interview with Louise and I, and he said, it's not your inner voice as me this time. He said, you have everything in you that you need to write this book. He said, and if you don't, then I will take care of it. So I was delighted. But this is something so foreign to me at first, but it was wonderful, and I felt so good about him asking me to do it. Well, another time, this is very important. This is the beginning of something even bigger that changed with us. I was on the veranda, I sat on the veranda, and behind me sat Venkatesh. And he's a saint. He and I are great friends, and he's a wonderful fellow to have sitting there. And it's about halfway back on the veranda. And this is what I meant when I said that I was sitting about 21 feet from Swami's doors for 21 years. And I'd watch everything, I'd learn everything. I just loved it there. But Swami came out, and he walked over to me, and I was sort of, I think I was holding up part of I'm not sure, it was many years ago. I was holding up part of the book, and he looked at me, and he didn't look at those. He just looked me in the eye. Very serious face, very intense look, and I returned it. By that time, I'd been around there for so many years. I loved it, and I knew something was happening. But he was looking at me, and it was for like a full, solid, powerful 8 seconds. Now, 8 seconds of Swami's look, as you well know by now, is a dramatic kind of a thing. Well, Venkatesh, sitting behind me, experiencing that Swami's look into my eyes, it was so powerful for him that he, after Swami went back inside of his door, he went home. He told me the next day, he said, I went home and I meditated on that, Jack. He said, something very big is happening. I don't know what it is. He said, but it's almost as if Swami is he's giving you an initiation, is the term they use over there a lot. He's giving you initiation, or something big is happening there. So I knew too, by the way, I knew the same thing. And when he looked into my eyes, I looked back into his. There was no fear, nothing. It was just a wonderful, wonderful time with Swami. And it was a turning point in our whole life. We knew it then, and we know it now. So anyway, that book came out, the Bhagavad Gita walkthrough. It was finally called a walkthrough for Westerners. Swami looked at when it was ready to come out. I brought it to him for him to bless it, and he was just very, very happy. He said, Bhagavad Gita. I said, yes, Swami. Yes, good. For Westerners? I just sat there, didn't know quite what to say. And he said, yes. There's something. He indicated fine. And what he does, by the way, probably is know who's going to be publishing it. He didn't have a publisher at the time, but he knew who was going to be publishing it, and he knew what they would prefer to call it. And it was going to be a publisher in the States and so forth. And he knew exactly how to handle that. And I knew he knew. So, and he knew that I knew that he knew. So those are those years. Something happened in, I think it was 98. My wife got ill, and that was about the time that I was doing that book too. But she got very ill, and what it was is a stroke. Come to think of it, it's not illness; it was a stroke. And we were sitting having our little lunch in our little flat. By then, we had a flat up on the 4th floor in the S3 building. It was wonderful. It was like living in the trees. It was quiet up there. It was really very pleasant. Again, that was across from Veronica. And I didn't know quite what to do. So finally and I wrote about this in the book, by the way, because it had such a big impact on me, that living by the Gita and having been so involved and engaged for years, those years in the Bhagavad Gita, and living in a place like Swami's place where the Gita, the values and the methods of the Gita are still very much alive in this world, was just totally mind-blowing. I was worried about her, very much so. So right down the hall from me was a doctor, a cardiologist at the new hospital. By that time, the new hospital was going strong. So he, of course, we brought her to the hospital, and she was in the hospital and so forth. But something happened to me. One time when I was sitting in the hospital, this was the first day or so, she came out of that unconsciousness that she would drift in and out of. She came out of that, and I said to her, Louise, I said, we got to see this as a blessing. We've got to see there's some gift in this for us. She said, yes, right away. That was a turning point, because that was a sort of a mind shift for me. I went back to our nice little place up on the 4th floor, 3rd floor in India, 4th floor here. And I felt better. I knew that no matter what happened, and we didn't know whether she was going to live or die. We didn't know whether she was going to be able to walk or what. And we had all those questions. And I had questions inside of me about whether I'd be able to handle it. I didn't know how I would. But suddenly, something came over my mind. And it was just something that it was very easygoing. I had a tremendous confidence that things would work out the way they're supposed to. No matter how they worked out, it would be the way they were supposed to. And we would accept whatever it was. So I went back over to the hospital, and I told her about that. And by the way, I called this the Prashad zone. And if you look at Prashad, Prashad is, by definition, it's a gift from divinity, from the divine, from God. It's a gift, or it's His grace. They use Prashad as a way of saying that His grace was that you got this, so forth. And that was right, and I knew that that's exactly that's the wheelhouse, if you were. That's where the direction for this whole sub-adventure was coming from. I also found out a few years later, or several months later anyway, that prashad also means a quietness, or a feeling of, how did I put it? Oh, good, yeah. Sort of a general, that's it, good, a certainty, a general mood of certainty and divine favor. And also to become within yourself totally clear and calm, clear and calm. So all those things happen. I wrote about them later because it stuck with us. Oh yeah, anyway, I went back to the hospital and I talked to Louise, and she immediately said, yes, she liked that. And not only that, the nice part of it is she was in the same mood. It wasn't me bringing the word to her. she was exactly in the same mood that I was in. This mood of calmness, the mood of understanding, the mood of acceptance, and so forth. That prasad zone, I call it, stuck with us. I mentioned in the book, for those who've read it, it's in the back of the book. And the reason I use that story, by the way, is to let people know that if they live the Gita, and if they breathe the Gita, then there will be certain ways of living and learning and taking care of themselves that they never realized would happen. And then we came back. Then Swami was getting more and more ill, and he was. We realized that something had switched. Swami, his way of dealing with us had changed, and we changed with it. And there's a lot of things that I could talk about. There's maybe a couple of hours worth of things, but they just changed. And we were perfectly happy with him, and he was perfectly happy with us. We didn't get many interviews at all. We knew that he was doing certain things, and I was working on a couple of other books, frankly. One of them was The Essential Wisdom of the Gita, and another one was Roadmaps to Self-Realization. And that's a book totally drawn from the Bhagavad Gita. And it's all of the things that people can do and should look at them and assess themselves, assess their own path and how they're doing on that path, and see what areas of their spiritual path they might have to put a focus on so they can get rid of this or improve that or whatever. So it's a really very practical, down-to-earth way of approaching it. Frankly, it's drawn from 1,000-year-old things that the rishis in India did. They call it Atma Vichara, self inquiry. So there's now a part of that Bhagavad Gita, not a part, the whole Bhagavad Gita turned out to be, after I got into the working on it, turned out to be 65 pages of, I hate to call them that, but worksheets that people can look at and assess their own path and how they're doing along the path and where they can get better and so forth. And that book is a free book now, and it exists in a form for the internet, or so people can look it up on their phone device. And it's 65 different worksheets based on chapter by chapter by chapter in the Gita of how they might improve their own spiritual development and their growth and their involvement. And that's the same thing that's happened with us, by the way. So writing the Gita, Louise's illness, and then on the on the 10th, on the 2010, the year 2010, we were getting ready to go on another trip. By that time, Louise was really much better. We were ready to go on a big trip to Kazakhstan and 5 other countries or something. And she looked at me. Getting ready, by the way, really meant a lot of things. Like getting people to translate this and to put this into their language and so forth. So it was a lot of work. And she looked at me with a sad look on her face and said, Jack, I can't do this anymore. And I was pleased. In 2010, this is Swami, don't forget, Swami passed from his body the next year. So I said, that's good, fine, because we know that our time with Swami, it was almost as if we had graduated. It was so nice. It was so nice to be there. It was so nice. And even saying that we're not going back this year and not going to do that thing in the Middle East was perfectly okay. And we knew that it was perfectly okay with him. It's just, we knew. I mean, that certainty that I talked about is one of the main things about the prasad zone. We just know, and he knows. So that was and then, by the way, when Swami did finally go into Mahasamadhi, people would call me and say, oh, I've been crying for days. How do you feel? I said, you really want to know how I feel? I said, yes. I said, I feel gratitude. That's all I can feel when I think of Swami. I can't think of his leaving this, and I'll miss him, but I can't think, it's just gratitude for all that we've gotten and all that he has given us over all of these years. Higher vibrations now, and he was very excited to tell it to both Louise and I. Higher vibrations now. That ties in with that and several other things. But anyway, what it amounted to is this. I developed, being a writer, I developed a way of looking at it as if he were the orange door. And what he's saying is go beyond that. So that Sathya Sai Baba, who's running everything, is so important. That's the Saguna. That's the God in a form aspect of him. That means that we can move beyond that. What a wonderful thing it was for us. So we started looking at him as the orange door, and a wonderfully welcoming orange door, but we could go beyond that. And that's sort of what happened to us. And that brought back another whole flash of that prasad zone idea. So we have in our lives had two major prasad zone things, and we've been living in it. So when we stopped going to India in 2010, we didn't stop anything with Swami. Swami was with us every minute. That's what I said. We're grateful. Well, we're living here grateful, and now we're in this period. Thank you. We're in this period of oh, good. That's a nice poem. Of sort of staying home and having to stay home and so forth. Everybody's concerned about it, but we're lavishing in it. It's just wonderful for us to be here and have this quiet time. And for example, think of all these stories of ours and all of our years with Swami, and it's a sort of a regeneration of the prasad zone here in our lives. And that prasad zone, really, if you look at it, is moving to the formless Sai, moving into the nirguna. And nirguna it's becoming one with him. And that's where we are, and that's why we're so happy now, no matter what happens in this world of ours. We're just there, and we're beyond the door.
I don't go from the beach living in LA, you don't go into LA very often, but I did. I got in my car immediately, drove downtown, drove to Hollywood, got the book, brought it back, walked in the door with this book with Sai Baba's picture on it, and my wife looked and said, oh, that's the man I dreamt about 3 weeks ago.
What?
So so he was bringing us, we just knew that. Oh, I've asked myself that same question a million times. Why? What on earth drew me here? I've always been a seeker. It is a sin defined as the Gita defines it. Something that holds you back from your spiritual growth is sinful. That's the only definition.
Storyteller, author, businessman, consultant, teacher, Jack Hawley. My guess is he prefers to be known as a follower of Indian holy man Sri Sathya Sai Baba. Welcome to Souljourns. This interview was recorded in Sai Baba's ashram in 2002.
Jack, first of all, thank you very much for joining us. This is a pleasure to be speaking with you. And I always seem to ask the one question right off the bat of everybody, so I am not going to make it any exception with you. What on earth drew you to Sathya Sai Baba?
Oh, I've asked myself that same question a million times. Why? What on earth drew me here? I've always been a seeker, and I don't know why, but I've always been interested in these kinds of mystical things. I was born and brought up a Catholic, and that part of the Catholic Church was really appealing to me. The bricks and mortar part wasn't very appealing. We brought up, my wife and I have had 7 children. We brought up all the kids Catholic, and then as I got older, I became more and more spiritual. And actually, in undergraduate school, I was an art major, and it was a part of the State University of New York by New York City. And in the early 50s, mid-50s, you had to be a Zen Buddhist to be an art major painter in New York.
Everybody was, in other words.
So, so I read Zen, became a Zen Buddhist in a way, in our own way, and it was very interesting for me. And then when after we got married, my wife and I, our relationship was always spiritual. And
I would imagine it would have been very busy raising a family of 9 people, 7 kids.
It was very.
How did you have time to be spiritual?
Very busy. That's all you have time for when you've got that many.
Well, you were very good Catholics for a long time.
That's right. And then it sort of ended. And one of the ways it ended was sort of funny. I used to threaten the kids at church. I'd say, look, now if you talk out of turn, or if you talk in church, then you're going to have to stay for the next Mass. And that was the worst thing I could say to them, so that kept them in mind. And I started laughing about that with Louise. And then that combined with the Zen Buddhism and increasing interest in spirituality, working with a lot of different kinds of groups as a professional, teaching, went back to Cornell and got some graduate degrees. And I got more and more interested in it.
Let me ask you, did the mystical element of Catholicism have any appeal for you?
Yes, it did, but it didn't have the cachet. It didn't have the extra little oomph for something that going far afield did.
Yeah.
There's an adventurer in me, perhaps,
Yeah,
that
I
needed to
relate
go.
to that.
Okay. Now, interestingly, and after all these years being in India, I can appreciate that much, much more. I mean, really, truthfully appreciate that mystical element.
I've talked to so many people who've been drawn to Sai Baba who were very strong in their Protestant beliefs, who really felt the wrath of friends and relatives who were Protestants because they couldn't relate to the mystical side of spirituality as much as Catholicism, Judaism, and whatnot. So you had something there that was pretty rare, and you weren't even aware of it for a long time because there's no cachet, as you said, for a while.
Yes, and it was in my own backyard, and it was more of an adventure to see it in Alan Watts, for example, or to hear it from someone else.
Yeah.
So that's what gradually brought me in this direction.
All right, then what was the literal event that tipped you at this guy's front door one day?
The literal event was a fellow that worked for me for a number of years, Bob Daniele. We lost touch with each other. He and I went our separate ways after a number of years in working in California aerospace industry. Then I got a little postcard from him. It was written, handwritten in pencil, a little postcard from the post office, and it said, "Dear Jack, this is your lucky day, Hawley." He said, "I'm sitting," and he was very spiritual, and we used to talk about these things a lot. So he said, "This is your lucky day indeed, because I am sitting here on the porch." He used the word porch. "I'm sitting here on the porch of God." So I'm spending as much time as I can here in India. This is after not seeing him for 2 years. So my interest was indeed tweaked. And he said, and a book had just come out, and the only place you can get it in Los Angeles is in Hollywood at the center. And I didn't know what the center was.
The Tustin Center you talking
No,
about?
this is in Hollywood.
Okay. The Bodhi tree?
No, this was the Sai Center in Hollywood.
The Sai Center
Yes.
in Hollywood, okay.
I forget the street it was on. But he said, go, and on this postcard, he said, "Go there and buy this book by Sam Sandweiss." So, and it just came out. That was in 1976. So I don't go from the beach living in LA, you don't go into LA very often, but I did. I got in my car immediately, drove downtown, drove to Hollywood, got the book, brought it back, walked in the door with this book with Sai Baba's picture on it, and my wife looked at it and said, "Oh, that's the man I dreamt about 3 weeks ago."
What?
So so he was bringing us, we just knew that.
She dreamed by recognizing his picture.
Yes.
She identified him
Yes.
because of her dream.
Well, it was a very pretty dream too. She dreamed that a Jesus came to her, and then in addition to Jesus, there was this other brown face that she didn't quite know, this fuzzy-haired fellow. So he came also, and in the same voice, they both looked at her and said, well, what do you love? And she said, I love God with my whole heart. And then they went away. But she was so touched by that. It was so important to her that she didn't tell me.
So on your radar screen then, her reaction to the book you just brought into the house all of a sudden made a difference for you too.
Yes, it did. Well, yes,
Your
but
friend
not, it
recommended?
wasn't a total upheaval, but it made a difference. I had been turning toward vegetarianism just by nature, because I could read what the Bureau of Health was coming out with and so forth, National Institute of Health. So I was turning in that direction, and then just everything seemed to click, and we moved more seriously in this direction. 2 years later, I came to India alone. We still had some kids at home, and she just was too tied down. So I knew it was going to be a long trip, and really there was some skepticism in me. And the skepticism was this, that I live in Southern California, and every fifth person you meet on the street there is a guru of some kind or another, and they all come through with the answer. Oh, here's a fellow with the answer. He's
The
got the answer.
teacher, the guru to align yourself with.
So even though my good friend Bob told me about this person here, this entity, and I'd read some books, and I read Sam's wonderful book that introduces a lot of people to Swami, I still had that skepticism in me.
So your friendship with Sam, with your buddy, and Sam Samwise's book, and your wife's dream, three powerful catalysts. They weren't quite enough to push you over the deep end yet.
No.
You still had some skepticism.
Oh, no, that's right.
Yeah.
There's a skeptic in me.
Yeah. Well, that's
still
healthy,
is.
probably.
Okay. Well, it is for me. I don't think it is for many people, but it is for me.
Then what?
So then I came, but I came to India, and I think, see, I'm a consultant by that time, so I think, well, it's a long trip, an expensive trip, and what if this turns out to be a totally phony kind of a situation? So I hedged my bet. Then I called up some friends, got some business in Japan, and then from Japan I went to Hong Kong, had a little business in Hong Kong, went into Thailand. I had a little business in Thailand, even had a couple of people
Getting
meet.
closer and closer, aren't you?
Oh yes. Well, my objective was to come here to India. I mean, it was absolutely clear I wanted to do that, but I wanted to hedge my bet.
Yeah.
Because, what if this turns out to be a total...
You want to have some business along the way, too.
That's right. So, that's my Protestant ethic coming out, I think. So anyway, and then when I got here, by the time I got here, I was really ready, and I was hopeful. And I had been on the road 6 weeks. Oh, and by the way, I had my negotiation with my wife was this, that if I can do this, then I'll meet you in London after. So I'll just go on around the world and meet her in London. I had to go into Greece for some business and into Italy, and then meet her in London. But, and in those days, Iran was still open. So I had to go into Isfahan and do some business there. So anyway, in India, I got here, and I was very happy finally to arrive. I'd been traveling through Asia for so long, and I had some kind of a stomach problem, the traveler's illness. And I was awfully uncomfortable. And I was living in the East-West Hotel, they called it, in Bangalore. Swami was in Whitefield. And I was here for a month, 5 weeks. And the first day here, though, that illness hit me, very uncomfortable. So I thought, well, I'll stay in the hotel. I'm going to have to stay here for 3 days. I knew that, and I'm going to be very uncomfortable. But I've never really seen him in the flesh. So what I'll do is I'll get in the taxi, go out to Whitefield Ashram so I can see him, get a lay of the land. Then while I'm back here recuperating from this illness, I'll know what it looks like. I won't have to imagine it in my mind. So I got in a taxi to go out there, and I was so sick that I actually reached over a couple of times to poke the driver and say, take me back to the hotel. But I didn't. Something told me not. We got to the ashram. I stepped through the little gate inside the gate, the door in the gate. Stepped through that, and as soon as I stepped through, and I wasn't aware of it at first, I was feeling better. And this is from being really sick that night. I was feeling better. I sat there that day and I watched him come from a distance. I didn't want to get too close. And I watched everything. I watched the monkeys on the wall, and I was aware after a couple of hours that, oh, my illness has left me. I'm very happy with that. Well, good. It was a much shorter one than I thought. That night, 5 o'clock or so, I stepped back through that gate to go back to my hotel, and immediately I was sick again. So So I spent a very uncomfortable night. That night, I thought, well, the next day I'll go out there again. I'm feeling a little bit better. I went out that day, sick all the way out. As soon as I stepped through the gate, I was well again. And that's when it finally hit me, oh, there is something very special here.
So you're starting to slowly put it together because of your own personal experiences.
Yes, oh yes. And that's been both of our lives, my wife and I.
Now, how many years has that been?
That was in 1978.
So that's pretty early on as Sai Baba seekers go. I mean, many people have discovered him of late. Relatively full of people from the 70s and 60s and before that. So what did you do? Did you decide that this has some value to it you wanted to pursue, or?
Yes, and that's a nice way of putting it, Ted. I decided that this has some value. There's something very special, and I can proceed. And I knew by then that he just pulls us in at our own speed anyway. Each person is totally different. So I proceeded. She didn't come, and when I got home, then we would go to Sai meetings. We had some business in San Diego, and the Sai meeting was on the way, the monthly meeting, so we'd always plan it to go on that day with enough time so that we could stop by and spend that evening singing bhajans and so forth, which were very foreign.
I was going to say, what about the foreign element of bhajans, the Hindu overlay, as I call it, the culture of India? All of it is exotic, beautiful, and deeply enriched history, but it's different from the way you and I were raised.
Yeah,
and most people don't take to something that different.
Well, that's right. What I do is I would sit gently. I love the quiet. I love the people. I mean, I could tell their gentleness, and I love the feel of the place. The bus meant nothing to me. So I'd actually count them on my fingers, hoping that they'd be over.
2 more to go.
For a while, they were very enjoyable to me. Now, during the period, I would still have my time with the guys. We'd go to Mexico maybe once a year. People my same age go to Mexico and have a rip time.
So your old circle of friends, and I taking the liberty of getting it, that's changed over the years. You kept that intact. You did the same thing that you only know to do, to let off some steam and do a little R&R and have fellas.
Yes, but I started playing bhajans tapes in the van, and they all thought I was rather weird. It was sort of fun, and I can still remember driving through the Mexican desert, listening to Gopal, Gopal, Gopal.
Parenthetically, before we continue with the story here, why do you suppose it is that somebody who's hooked by, let's say, Sai Baba, such as Louise, your wife, and as you became, that sort of magical involvement doesn't seem to work with every Tom, Dick, and Harry lined up along the road, even if they're your brothers or cousins or best friends. Why do you suppose that is?
We have asked that question a million times. The best answer I can come up with that's most under is previous lives. There's nothing in this life that would seem to differentiate us that much. I was a pensive little guy. I was the youngest of 5 brothers myself, so I spent a lot of time alone.
You didn't get a lot of attention.
Didn't get a lot of attention, and I've always enjoyed that. And so that sort of leaned me in that direction. I was always, again, as I say, at the mystical, in the mystical part of the religion. I felt very comfortable, and I started seeing quite early on is that the mystics of each of the religions seem to communicate more with one another than with their own tradition.
Right, and that seems to be something you either have or you don't have. And my dearest friends I work with in the workplace for many, many years, I genuinely sense that they would like to know more, but their interest only goes so far, and I just accept it because that's where they are.
Yes.
I call Sai Baba my tennis, my golf. I don't do those things, but I seem to have, they can relate to passion through those metaphors.
Okay, good. Yes.
And so then they understand, so you feel as strongly about this Sai Baba as I do about my golf game. Okay, I can relate to that. But they don't find it easy to transfer over to a spiritual teacher like this.
Well, there's another, really people are at different levels of development spiritually. Those people, they just legitimately don't have an interest. And they're perfectly happy doing what we would call worldly things and living at that level where we know we've been blessed somehow, we've been graced to know that there's something above and beyond that.
Right, and this is still a puzzle for me because I can't think of an endeavor on Earth, if I were a billionaire, that's more exciting, that has a greater adventure pull to it than the spiritual.
Me too, me too. And yet I don't have a missionary bone in my body. I'm perfectly happy keeping to myself and doing it that way.
Sai Baba doesn't seem to want you to have a missionary bone in your body. He doesn't seem to want people to go out and evangelize or proselytize.
But a lot of people have that in them, as you well know. They say, oh, well, this is so wonderful. You've got to change, Mom, or you've got to change, hubby, or you've got to change friends, or whatever.
I'm a journalist. I want to spread the story. And he's told me to my face as recently as a week ago, don't take my name to America. Take my works. And
nice?
it's nice, yet it's frustrating because I feel if it's as satisfying for you and your wife and my friends and for myself, why wouldn't I want to share this?
Well, we have now our 5 children that are surviving now. They are all in different places, so it's interesting to see them. One of them is a Buddhist girl. She's very spiritual, woman now, of course. One of them has been here to Swami, so he knows the power of this place and so forth. But he's living his own life, accumulating things and living a regular person's life. And my wife asked him just before this trip, she said, what should I say to Swami about you? He said, oh, he thought for half a second. He said, tell him to keep running my life. And then he went on about his business.
And the other 3 kids?
The other, well, one of them has had an accident and fell out of a tree, actually, in the woods in Maui, Hawaii, and broke his hip. He was all alone for 2.5 hours. So that kind of thing pushed him in the direction of Swami. So he asked for some vibhuti. We sent it, and it really helped him heal that broken hip much quicker, and he knows it. He's not willing yet to add this element to his life, but he really respects it and understands it.
And what about your last child?
The last one, there are 2 others.
Okay.
One of them, they're both busy in life. One of them, very ill, very Catholic, and is quite resistant, very tolerant of our involvement, but quite resistant for her and her family.
Help me to understand this. They see you not just as the next door neighbor who's found a guru half a world away, but as mom and dad, loving spiritual people that you are, who have found something that's transformed your life. I don't understand why they're not more drawn to what you have, what you found.
Me too. I don't know why they aren't. And I sometimes even think at their age, is this still resistance? Is this still that I'm not going to do it because they do it?
I hope not, but it could be. Yeah.
They do see the change. They see the change in both of us. So they can't deny that. And it's wonderful. And we just, it's flaunted there before their eyes.
Well, let's go back to the story now for a second. You're being drawn along more and more, and when was the day, in the 70s presumably, or the 80s, when you woke up and you realized that you weren't the person who had so much skepticism and so many doubts as you were a person who knew that this is where you wanted to be? Or did that day ever come?
That day never came.
All right.
It was so gradual. It was so much of a blend. I moved from one consciousness to another gradually, and I'm still moving in that direction.
I think that's probably good, don't you?
To me it is. But my wife got off the plane and she heard a voice in her head say, you're home.
My wife, the same way. She didn't get off an airplane, but it took her about that same length of time. And I understand that might make the difference between men and women. That's common, I understand. Not exclusive to women, but usually they go very, very quickly.
Now there's another
and men
aspect.
go a little slower.
An aspect of this too is the world that I live in as a man, as a management consultant, going into various different company cultures all over the place. That has an impact on me also. Now I bring these skills that I learn, and I bring these talents, and I even bring some the nomenclature and some of the music with me. But still,
what's the music of? I mean, the music of Baba to the business world, or vice versa?
The music of Baba to the business world.
I was going to say, what's the music of the business world?
Oh, okay.
The cash register. Well, is that greeted with a lukewarm reception, or Snickers, or do people really understand where you're coming from?
Yes.
They do?
No.
Oh, all 3 of those.
Snickers and lukewarm. And
okay. I would think you would be pretty quickly dismissed by a lot of your contemporaries.
There was a lot of self-selection.
Mhm.
In other words, a lot of people just wouldn't have me around. The people that did have me around were naturally drawn, or at least inclined in this direction enough to be willing to take some of the benefit from it.
So is this an experiment on your part in the business world?
You mean on my part?
Introducing some of these concepts?
No, it was measured, and it was part of who I am.
And do you think there's room for it today? I understand, I've been reading the literature you've been handing out about these conferences that you're sponsoring. Is the time at hand for this to be something we should all be interested
Wouldn't it
in?
be nice to make it that simple?
Yeah.
I think that the normal curve, if you will, hasn't changed, but people's consciousness is changing. When my book came out in 1993,
Which book was this?
Dharmic Management.
Okay.
It was the first management book with spirit in the title. The first that I know of, and the first that my publisher knows. Since then, there have been 75 or 80 published.
Mhm.
So it is expanding. People aren't as spooked by the nomenclature nowadays. But is there a big wave of spirituality flowing over the business world? It doesn't seem so.
Real quick question. I hope you have the answer that works for me, because I've always been the worker bee. I've never been the manager. And I've had a very good career being the worker bee. I don't know how that idea you're working at introducing, and I wish you great success, can succeed as long as the element that's biggest in the equation between manager and managee is fear. And I see fear everywhere in my career. And I don't know how you can ever break that down enough so that the spirit of spirituality can exist, can breathe.
That's interesting. It's I think that your sample might be a tough one, because there are industries that are not amenable to this at all. I live in Los Angeles, and the industry there, as you well know,
Sure.
is the movie industry and media. They just don't do this.
The capriciousness of the boss above you and the boss above that person can wipe you out in a nanosecond.
That's right. And they all know it, and there is great fear.
Yeah.
In other industries that are more settled, or other industries that are perhaps more creative, and I can't say that. Let me take it back. Creative in a certain way, they're more receptive to this.
Go ahead.
For one thing, as an example of this, the one part of my book that's been reprinted the most was the part that I was worried about people feeling was too weird.
And what did it say?
That's the part about love in the workplace. Now, accounting associations have called me up and asked for permission to publish this. So that little part of the book. So surprising as that does touch some people, and people all know it, of course. And when they hear me talk, many of them are disappointed that their boss doesn't know about it. I wish I had a nickel for everybody that bought that book for their boss.
So the concept of love in the minds of some people in the business world is something that has an attraction to it, obviously. Do you see the day coming when the motivating factor for you personally as a teacher, that person's name might also have an appeal? Or do you think this is going to be limited in our lifetime, the name of Sai Baba?
I like the question because you use the word think in it. So my meager mind thinks that it's going to be limited. But above that mind, I know that if he so desires it, that is what will happen. But now bringing it back to earth, my mind, however, can't comprehend that. It just can't work that high.
Be a different world if it happened.
Yeah. It would be nice to happen, and he says it's going to happen. I don't doubt that. That's very interesting. So I have to work at two levels. At the level of faith, I have no doubt. No doubts. And my wife and I both are given the great boon of certainty. I mean, it's wonderful. We have no concerns whatsoever. This is from that skeptical fellow. No concerns whatsoever about that. However, my training in the organization behavior field of psychology, sociology, anthropology, all those things, tell me how difficult it is to change societies, change cultures, change organizations, and change people's behaviors. So I know all that at an intellectual level.
Well, let's start with you. How did you grow beyond fear? Are you fearful today?
Very little.
You afraid of dying?
in the early days coming here to Swami, that's the way I used to describe it. People would say, well, what is so important about that place? And at one point I just breathed a sigh and said, well, there's no fear left in me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very surprising for them.
You afraid of dying?
No, not a bit.
Afraid of losing a loved one?
Not a bit.
Afraid of losing all that you have?
It never comes into my mind.
Afraid of nuclear war?
Really, not an iota. Not a
See,
bit.
that's quite remarkable. People would think that you found something, but it's probably a chemical that would alter your consciousness.
And it is. It's probably an internally developed chemical.
So let's talk a little bit about this guy. Somewhere around the world, there's going to be somebody hearing this who's never heard his name before. And I'm not quite sure how you go about trying to explain who you're talking about here. But give it a whack, if you will. You've got somebody sitting before you who's never heard the name, and they've got a limited amount of minutes to understand why he's transformed your life.
So my first suggestion would be to come over to India with me and live for 24 years. If they don't want to do that, then my second suggestion is come over and live for 24 days.
Do they have hot water?
That's what they say. Or what? You mean no washing machines? It depends on who would ask. If I really want to startle them so that they remember, not startle them so that they turn it off, but startle them so that they remember, I'd say something about, this is the avatar. This is the incarnation of divinity now on this planet. And they would poo-poo that, of course, and especially all my Christian friends, which are all my friends. And I would say, well, yes, but don't forget that back during the time of Jesus, those same kind of poo-pooing would go on. Well, you're telling me that there's God on earth? You know, that didn't happen with Jesus until many hundreds of years after his advent. So. Yet
there still are people who seem to find sweetness in those words and ideas and gravitate to them immediately. My wife and I was giving a talk because of the business I'm in to a big successful church in Cleveland, Ohio, in a suburb, and they asked about spiritual life, and they asked about travels, and they asked about who this person is. And I said, well, frankly, I can't begin to answer some of your questions because I'm just not that well versed, but I know somebody who is. My wife came and started answering a few questions, especially from one woman in her, I think, early 40s, family woman. 1 month later to the day, she was on a plane coming here to see Sai Baba. So I guess you never know when there's going to be somebody who's been hungering for that awareness.
Right.
So how do you handle it? I mean, should we stifle our enthusiasm? Should we go out and tell everybody we know? Or when do we know when to exercise that judgment?
My wife and I travel. Since the children have been grown, we have a policy that we travel together. So if I have a business conference to go to, she comes with me. A lot of times she's very bored. Some of the time she's extremely useful. We put on a little workshop called Glimpses of God. And we make sure it's totally optional, that people can come or not. This is not a required course. We'll do it in off hours.
These are for business associates?
These are to business people. And we have a little album that we show them, or if we're lucky and we've prepared, well, we have a little video that we'll bring. And I'm very clear on the morning of this. We'll do it at night, and in the morning with the whole group, I'll make sure that they know that this is not about a travel log to India. This is about two people's very personal experiences with a guru in India.
So what will happen? Maybe 4 or 5 people show up?
No, about 50% show up every time. This was very interesting.
And how many walk out?
I can't. Maybe 1 or 2. But not an appreciable number.
So that's kind of like your side seva. You just talk from your heart about your own personal spiritual experience.
Yes,
What
and
a great
lot of them
way
will
to
show up here too after. So it's really very nice. And again, there's not a missionary bone in my body. What I love doing is sharing information.
Yeah.
I love sharing new ideas.
Well, you're an obvious communicator. I can tell that. And regardless of what the specifics are of your business, you really are communicating the element of what this person represents, which is, I think, just genuineness from the heart. Some people call it love, some people call it religion, some people call it Sai Baba, but you've got it, and you're not afraid to talk about it. which I think is one of the big hurdles most people have to overcome. My wife will not mention his name, unless somebody asks first.
I usually don't either. And we have a sort of a policy that way. We don't go anywhere where we're not invited. And if we're invited, then if we do mention his name, it's strictly optional. And that strictly optional thing, I think, is what swings it.
Yeah. What do you think he has planned for you? I'm mildly surprised to hear you're still working. You work to meet the bills here in Prasanthi Nilayam, here in Puttaparthi, India. I mean, it's pretty expensive living here.
I know $1 a day is really tough on anybody.
I mean, maybe you can take a couple of years off and not have to work in order to...
Well, we come here, we live here for 6 months each year.
You do?
So that doesn't leave an awful lot of time to work. And then we find ourselves in various places on the planet where he puts us. We live our life by 2 simple, sweet little words, Swami puts. As he places us here, he puts us there, he places us in other places.
Are you one of those persons who believes that everything that happens to you, wherever you are, that's where you're supposed to be?
Absolutely. I mean, really, 108%.
Even if you're in a car wreck? I mean, I'm just pulling an idea with it.
I don't know. You know, I haven't been in one, but yes.
Yeah, okay. So how do you know where he wants you to be?
It comes together. That's the best way of saying it. If we're supposed to go to South America, and then we get an invitation to go, and then things will come together. The money will come, the time will come, especially the opportunity will come, and everything happens so that we know that there's a hand in it that's larger than ours. And I think that's the key.
I've got a $64 question about that. How do you tell the difference between the desire to be in Paris at a business conference for 3 weeks in June, or the discernment that that's where you're supposed to be? Because that's a tough one for me. I know what I desire, but it may not be what I'm supposed to discern that I'm supposed to do.
Wonderful question. Work on it from 2 angles. One is to eliminate the desire. So that gets rid of the question, see, in a way. Funny. So if you don't really have any desire to be in Paris, then there's no fancy in you that manufactures some kind of
very good.
A need to go there. That's one. The other is to be extremely receptive to what goes on inside. And there seems to be some steps in this, and they're pretty well organized. And the literature, after I got these steps from Swami, the literature backs this up everywhere I look. And the steps are this. First, become quiet. You're not going to get these kind of instructions or directions if you're not quiet. So first, become quiet. Then there's an element of belief in it. You've got to have belief. Belief in what? Belief in this kind of a process really working. Belief that there is a bigger hand in this universe. There's a voice inside that will come to you if you allow it. Third, this is a 5-step process, so it's not a great big long thing. Third is ask. Put the question, and what the question is. Should I go to Rio de Janeiro? And then listen for the answer. Listen really is be receptive to whatever the answer is that comes to you.
How do you know the answer? How do you know how to recognize the answer?
You never really do, except it'll come in certain ways. It might come in a symbolic way. A book will open, or come to you, or you'll happen to wake up in the middle of a movie on a plane that
and the key line of dialogue will have the answer to your question.
Right, something like that. So it comes that way, or it might come in a faint whisper, or it might come in just intuitively that you know. Now that last thing is the toughest.
The 5th one.
So the 5th one, and this is the interesting one, this is trust it. Now that means that your batting average at first is going to be lower, but after you trust it a few times and you strike out, then you realize, well, that wasn't it. And then you strike out again, oh, that wasn't it. But after a while, your batting average goes up, slowly, 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 until this becomes a way of life. Until this is the way you live.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's really that simple then for you. And that you practice that still.
Yes. What came to me interesting, when I was writing the first book, I was totally stumped at one chapter. And I sat there, I didn't know what to do. So I sat at my keyboard, my computer keyboard, and I said, Swami, please help me on this. I meditated, became as receptive as I could. 5 letters came to me: Q, B, A, L, T. And I had the same reaction. What? It means Q, B, A, L, T. What could that mean? So I tried several words that began with Q. There aren't very many. Tried several words, and quiet was the one that felt the best. The iron filings inside of this magnet lined up.
What was the B?
B was the belief. And what happened each time I hit on the right word is I could type more. But before that I couldn't. My fingers wouldn't work. It was like somebody stepped on the brake in a car.
So the answer came that quickly?
Well, quickly, over maybe 20 or 40 minutes. That was how quickly. But then slowly I'd try different words: Q, B, quiet, believe, ask, listen, and trust. So that's my formula. Now since then, I've, of course, and this is the way it always happens, you know, once you really make a decision, then the universe moves also for you, and providence supplies you with what you need.
That's
so I've
very
been reading
interesting.
all over that this is what the, quotes, the professionals in this business, in the intuition building business do. It's always involves quietness, it always involves putting the question, and it always involves being receptive, listening. Oh, and there's also an element of giving it up. Not really trying, not really wanting it, not really worried about it.
Well, we're 37 minutes into our little discussion. By now we may have shaken away anybody who has no interest in what the main subject is. So for those who are still with us, the big question that has to come out sooner or later is, who on earth is Sai Baba?
Sai Baba is now a 77-year-old man in India who, when he was very young, announced that he was the avatar.
And what?
Avatar is, there's no, this is dead serious. He announced that he is an incarnation of divinity here on this planet. He lives in a very remote little village in South India, South Central India. So, and he had all the kinds of accoutrements that a divinity, a divine entity would have. He would bring people back from the dead. When he was a little boy, he would play whatever season it was, and he'd bring fruit to people, whatever fruit they wanted. People would fall in love with him immediately wherever he went, and so forth. So there was something very special, and then he announced at age 14, I think it was 12 maybe, announced that he was divinity and he had work to do in this world. And since then it's become very clear the work that he has to do in this world is to bring character and integrity and truth and love and so forth back to this planet. So he's been a phenomenon since then. There's some things, it's nice, by the way, because he does some mystical things, and we can all argue them because they're invisible, but he does some wonderfully visible things. He has university, he has scores of campuses of schools, grade schools and high schools and so forth. He has 2 wonderful, absolutely free hospitals that he's built in the last 12, 15 years. And these are large hospitals, and by any standards, and I've had friends who are medical directors at hospitals come from the States to see these, so by any standards, these are top-notch hospitals. And they're all free. Everything he does is educational, is a university with PhDs level down to basic students, undergraduates. Everything is free. So he does all this, and he does it to help the planet. So there's things that you can't, it's very hard to disagree with.
And if your most skeptical child was here, or coworker from 20 years ago, and heard you saying these things, how would you answer a question regarding your future with Sai Baba? Like, for example, to what end are you willing to go maintaining this affinity with Sai Baba? They've just heard your story, and you're sitting here trying to tell us who Sai Baba is and why you follow this teacher in India. How far are you prepared to go?
That's really an interesting question, and it just never comes up. I'll go where he puts us, and we'll both go that way. And it's really nice that way, because it's really an instance of surrender. We've surrendered, and we will go. Now, does that mean we become mindless? Absolutely not. It's just the opposite. It seems that the mind works differently when we're talking about this. If he were to put us away from here, we'd be there and we'd be perfectly happy. And we are. We live in the West and live in India, and wherever we are, we know he puts us, and we're perfectly contented. We don't have any desires to be here. My wife used to. She used to feel terrible about leaving here and melancholy and so forth. And now she's over that even.
Jack, we began this discussion talking about doubts and skepticism even. And today, where are you as a human being with those doubts and whatever skepticism might still remain? Because it's not bad. It's not a sin to be doubting.
It is a sin defined as the Gita defines it. Something that holds you back from your spiritual growth is sinful. That's the only definition. So there's no such thing as hell. There's no such thing as being punished for it. But if you get in the way, if you do something inadvertently even, that gets in the way of your spiritual growth, then you've committed a sin, which is a nice, healthy way of defining it. I
once had a Catholic priest tell me in a general confession that the only sin he can think of, and he's not quite sure this was a sin, to volunteer to turn away from the face of God, to knowingly turn away from the face of God.
That's right.
Why would anybody do that?
You know, that's one of the main teachings in the Catholicism that I remember too.
And he said,
telling us.
and if you would do that, obviously you couldn't be sane, so it wouldn't be a sin anyway. Well, Jack, thank you very much. This is, I think it's going to have to be the first of many discussions, because we just skimmed the top a little bit and the time is already gone. And if it's all right, I'd like to resume with chapter 2 someday and continue to hear about your life and the life of your wife.
It would be my
Sai Baba.
pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Very much.
You're welcome.